Thank you for joining and welcome to Lead Dev Bookmarked. Lead Dev is a global community of engineering leaders who come together to discuss all things leadership, teams, tools, and tech. Bookmarked is our monthly book club that takes place on the first Tuesday of every month. Our sessions cover an array of engineering and leadership books that our awesome Lead Dev audience can draw insights and practical experiences from. I'm Suzan Bond, and I'll be your moderator for this discussion. I'm a former COO of a scaling startup and an executive coach. My specialty is tech leaders. You can find me on Twitter at Suzan Bond. Today we'll be talking about elastic leadership, growing self-organizing teams. If you have questions for Roy, please pop them in the Q&A feature on Zoom. So let me tell you a little bit more about Roy Osherove. Roy has been in the software industry for over 20 years, leading small and large teams, and lately has been doing consulting. He is the author of Elastic Leadership and the Art of Unit Testing, and the upcoming pipeline-driven book about DevOps and continuous delivery, and does training and consulting on these topics around the world. You can find more information at osherove.com, and I'm pretty sure Roy has it. Yeah, there you go, pointing at it. There you go. So if you want to find more information about Roy, that's where you can go. So welcome, Roy. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'd heard about your book a while ago, and when they brought up like, oh, we want to bring Ryan on the show, I thought, oh God, that's great. I'm really excited to talk to you about it. So I'm curious, how did this book come about? Like, what was the impetus for writing this book?
The reason this book was written is because I was learning how to become a team leader myself, and early on, I had a good coach that taught me a very important lesson, which is if you want to do something, try to teach it. And I was kind of forcing myself into a very deep pool in that I was trying. Well, this book started as a blog at 5whys.com, so 5whys.com, and where I kind of detailed my own experiences as a team lead. But the plan was always to put it in a book. And the book that I modeled this after at the beginning was 97 things every developer should know, but I wanted to do it for team leaders, basically. Because as a team lead, nobody really taught me how to lead other people. So much like a lot of other managers and leaders at the beginning, especially in the tech, I had to learn everything the hard way. And I'm still learning everything the hard way. So I think we need more people to talk about their good and also bad experiences and what they've learned from them so that we can actually get better. And there's also a lot of, there's a lot of fluff happening in the tech industry where there's a lot of leadership advice, which is, I would say, sometimes it's not as practical, especially in the development. And I wanted to write a book for someone who works in software development specifically and use the language that I know. So some of the lessons are specifically from the point of view of someone who's working with software developers. So it's basically a book about the things that I learned the hard way. And I learned the lesson of writing that book from the previous one, which is The Art of Unit Testing, where I, again, documented my own lessons of the hard way of how to write unit tests. And that was a very nice success. And so that's kind of my pattern these days. If I learn a subject, I then end up kind of writing something on it, and that makes me know it much deeper. So there was unit testing, there's leadership. Now I'm working on continuous delivery and pipeline-driven organizations, and I'm writing a book about it. And all these things, they keep driving me deeper into very interesting subjects that I've always wanted to learn, but they give you an excuse to do something in a way that is much deeper than I would have done if I didn't have any incentive to do it.
Well, yeah, and I like what you say too. One of the things I notice about the leadership industry or those who write about it is sometimes it's academic or theoretical, and I'm like, no, let's make it practical. Because it's really, leaders face complex environments. And I mean, I started a series too, telling real life stories, because I wanted to learn how do people really handle things? Not like do it theoretically like this, theory and practice, wildly different things in my experience. And I've learned the hard way too. And so on that note, you talk about in the book about realizing that your leadership style was oblivious to the needs of the team. Like, I think this happens so often. Like, where were you missing the mark and how did you figure this out?
Well, for those of you who didn't read the book deals with three team phases and three team modes and three leadership types that fit those modes. And one of the first mode is survival mode, where the team is basically running around like headless chickens, and they are already late on the things they're late for, and they just putting out fires. They don't have time to learn new things. And then the leadership style that a lot of people try to apply to that might completely miss the mark. So, for example, I'll come to how I realized that I completely missed the mark on this. But when I began as a team lead, I thought I was a great team lead because I was protecting my team from a lot of different things, and I was kind of their shield. So I was like their Superman, and everyone came to me, and that I protected them and shielded them. If they needed something really difficult, I would code it at night and then give it to them, etc. If I look at my leadership style today that I did then, I realized that I wasn't a very good leader to the team, because the team that left, when I left, the team that I left behind was basically had the same skills as the team that I met for the first time. So I didn't actually make any impression on the team. They didn't learn anything new. They didn't get new skills. They didn't become better at what they do. They basically learned how to depend on someone else to do things for them. And that's fine for some people, but the way that I believe is that we need to grow the teams. However, if I wanted to just grow the team, can you grow a team that's in survival mode? That's a very big question. So when I was at some point, I was doing a talk at a conference or a meetup, and I was saying, well, and this was way before I went to the three modes. I was talking about how you should protect the team, and you should take control of the team, or someone will take control instead of you, and you should know that control things. And then someone said in the audience, they said that is the opposite of everything that we're trying to do, because how does that stand with be agile and teach your team and self-organizing teams and all that stuff? Do you believe in that? And I realized that yes, I also believe in that. So how can I believe in two completely different styles of management, and both of these things exist in the same world at the same time? And the answer that I came to is that they don't exist at the same time. Sometimes you use that style, and sometimes you use that style. And the way that I got to that was that yes, you do need to take control in specific situations, such as when a team is in survival mode. But you do not want to keep that control when a team is in learning or self-organizing mode. That would be horrendous. And the other way around is that you do not want to take a team that's in survival mode. They're running around, they don't have time to learn anything, and then treat them as if they're in learning mode, as if they're self-organizing, as if they can make their own decision at this point, because they can't. If you take a team of people that are already late on anything and you say, okay, I'm going to lock you in a room, do whatever you need to do, I'll figure it out, but the team does not know how to handle the reality around them, then we're basically, we're not giving them any tools to survive. They do need protection when they're missing the skills inside the organization on how to handle organizational pressures, how to handle when things are coming, when managers come in and ask for features, how to handle technologies that they don't know, how to handle technical debt. They don't know how to handle those things, then they do need shielding so they can make time and get out of survival mode. And then they can actually learn these new things. So that was kind of my understanding. Someone was challenging me about my leadership style, and I agreed with them. But I also agreed with myself at the same time. And that was my realization, is that there are actually multiple styles, and you have to change your style based on how the team is actually doing, what skills the team has today. And you might need to change your leadership style today to fit the skills of the team.
Yeah, I love it. There's a lot to uncover. I'm so excited. Let's talk about there's two pieces of your model. So we'll get to the phases in 1 second for everybody. But can we just talk real quickly about after you had this realization and you came up with, three different leadership styles, right? Like you identified three different leadership styles. Can you just give a quick definition and understanding of each so that we all, everybody has the same language, and then we'll talk more about how they map to some of the phases.
Absolutely. So the first leadership style is, I'll call it a more command and control leadership, which is very common in a lot of organizations. And in survival mode, that would mean some protection. And I see that Lauren was asking, what do we mean by protection? Well, protection means that I basically tell in the organization for people above the team to say, hey, if you have something that you need from the team, you go through me. You do not go directly to the team. You have to pass through me, and I'll filter it, and I'll answer you on behalf of the team. So I'm shielding them. I'm like a force field around them. So that command and control, I think it fits perfectly in a world where you want to take your team from survival mode into learning mode. And the way to do that is to actually set a specific commitment for the team, and actually control, kind of do a little bit of micromanagement sometimes, where you let the people that are strongest at something to do that something, so that you can get out of survival mode, and the people that are weakest to do the things that they are strong at. But you do not challenge the team to learn new skills at that point, because they don't have time to slowly practice. Now, if you want to learn more about these styles, there's the domain is elasticleadership.com, and the model is explained there. There's like a picture of that. But so the command and control is great for the survival mode. But in learning mode is when the team actually has time to learn, and they're actually using that time to learn. And when I say learn, I mean make mistakes and slowly practice. People don't realize what slow practice actually means. There's a great book called Slack, which is all about how long does it take to learn new skills. But from my point of view, if you want to learn to see how long it takes to learn a new skill, if you have kids, or when you were a kid, try to remember how long did it take you to learn how to tie your shoelaces the way the grown-ups did. Or if you show a kid how to tie your shoelaces, if I'm tying them the regular way, it might take me 5-10 seconds maybe. But how long does it take a kid the first time, the second time, the 50th time? It takes weeks and weeks to practice to become better at it for most kids. So when we're talking about learning new skills, we're talking about slowing down the rate of development in our case, sometimes by up to 5 or 10 times slower for a few weeks or months while the team is learning new skills, which means that you actually have to reduce the amount of commitments that the team does during learning mode so that the team can learn how to handle and learn new skills. So in survival mode, you don't have time to learn. So if I'm sending a team to learn test-driven development, for example, they'll go to the training, but when they come back, if they're in survival mode, they're going to go directly back to where they were, which is not writing tests and whatever, because they don't have time to slowly practice and slowly learn how to actually write these tests, etc., because the pressure is going to be too high. They're going to go back to the old behavior. In learning mode, they would go, and then you would challenge them to actually slowly learn and build the quality in, even though it's really, really difficult. And that means reducing the amount of commitment. They might deliver a tenth of what they delivered on the first couple of sprints because they're learning this whole new language of how to do something. And without management support to do that, it will never happen. So that's where the leadership style is a coach, but sometimes a dictator. So the dictator comes in because you're letting the team make mistakes, but the mistakes have to happen in a sandbox. That is, the mistakes cannot be too big. I'll give you an example. I was coaching a bunch of Scrum Masters. And one of the Scrum Masters said, well, we had a big problem. I told my team, look, of course, you're self-organizing, decide whatever you want to do. And the team decided, and I don't know how many people that are listening are in the software development world, the team decided not to use source control, which is a devastating decision that has huge consequences, huge risks. But they decided not to use source control for a specific project. And I tried to convince them. That's what he said. I tried to convince them, but they're self-organizing. There's only so much I can do. I don't have any authority. And they ended up, of course, getting really, really huge problems on that project. So I think that coach/dictator comes in when you have to tell the team that they can make choices and they can make mistakes within a boundary of acceptable mistakes. So I might tell a team in that case, no, you cannot choose not to use source control, but bring me a list of 3 different types of source control and why you want to choose one of them and make a decision on them, but you cannot choose not to use one. That would be an example of that boundary.
Can I ask you a quick question? When you talked about command and control, and then there's like coach dictator, and I'm wondering, what is that coach dictator? What's the difference between those for folks? Like,
Yeah. So the coach dictator would be that I am providing you a sandbox in which you can make mistakes and slowly learn. So you have much less commitment, and you are challenged to do things, but if we get to a point where the consequences are too high for mistakes in the organization, then we're going to stop there and set a boundary and say, well, that's too much. We cannot go all that way. You can choose in this level of these decisions. It's like, I keep going back to kids, right? But if I tell my kid, you get to choose whether you wear a sweatshirt or not, and it's really rainy or snowy outside, that's a different decision than I tell the kid, you get to choose which sweatshirt you wear. But the question is not whether you wear or not, but which one you do. So you have to wear one. That would be an example of that.
And then command and control, there's less. Are you saying there's even less?
Yeah.
It's more narrow, just so people can understand some of that language, because I think it's a different way of thinking about it. So in the command and control, that what they can choose is much more narrow. Is that?
I think there's much less choice in command and control. I might actually say, okay, you're going to work on this. You're going to work on this. You're going to work on this. You're going to stop doing whatever you're doing right now and work. It feels much more like micromanagement, and that's why I try to get people to do it in very in a delimited piece of time, which means you cannot. You want to do that command and control maybe for a month, maybe a couple, maybe a few weeks. Worst case, but you cannot stay in that mode, because that mode can be devastating. People will quit. It ruins the entire morale of the team. But it's necessary sometimes. It's the point that I like to make is that I read a book by Jerry Weinberg, who wrote a lot of different books about team leadership, and he wrote a book called Leading Teams Congruently. And in that book, he said, I think it was in that book, paraphrasing, he said when the ship is sinking, the captain doesn't call a meeting. The captain gives orders. So in survival mode, the assumption is that the team is sinking, right? The ship is sinking, which means the organization is, you won't have a team if you keep doing what you're doing. So it's time for command control. In learning mode, the team can make mistakes. It's not sinking anymore. It's actually going steady, and you have room to maneuver and make. It's like teaching your kid to drive in a parking lot. You have room to make mistakes, right? But if command and control would be that you're holding the wheel, or you're holding the wheel and they're just pushing the gas, as an example. Everyone does what they're good at, or I'm driving and they're just navigating, as an example. And then the third mode is in self-organizing mode is more facilitator, which means that if up until now I might give the team sometimes actions to do or things to learn or challenge, in facilitator I might just say, these are the goals for the team, and you get to choose how to achieve those goals. The best way to think about that is, imagine you had a team of experts. So you took a team of team leaders, if you will. A team of team leaders is a team that you don't really have to say how to do something. You just say, well, we need to build something like this. Let me know how long it's going to take. What does it take to build it, whatever. And I trust you completely because you've already seen all the crap in the organization. You already know what it would take to build it. Another way to think about it, this team has built 100 websites before, and I'm asking them to build 101. I don't have to tell them how to build it. I just have to give them the goals. I trust them completely to do the right thing, and I trust them to make decisions. And most importantly, in a self-organizing team, I like to define it also as a team that knows what to do when they're stuck. So they know what to do when they don't know what to do. And I think that is one good way to think about a leader versus a non-leader, is that a non-leader, when they're stuck and they don't know what to do, they'll go to a leader to ask, what do I do in this case? A leader, whether appointed or not, if they're stuck, they'll usually have a technique or something they can use to move forward, even with less certainty. And so teaching the team how to know what to do when they don't know what to do, I think that is an important skill that we would teach them during the learning mode, which is, what do you do when you're stuck? Because if you take a team of team leaders and they're going to be stuck, they're not going to be stuck for long. They're going to be able to go through whatever is getting them stuck. For example, they don't have the permission to do something in the organization, or they tried something and it failed, or the technology turned out to be completely wrong and they have to choose a different technology, or they cannot agree between them. So they're stuck on the agreement, but they'll figure it out because they're self-organizing in that way. They'll figure out what to do when they're stuck. And I think that's a very important differentiation. So in a self-organizing team, you do not want to do command and control, and you do not want to be a dictator. You just have to set goals, and you have to keep a watchful eye whether the team is going back into survival mode or the team is going back into learning mode, because that can happen depending on the current situation in the company.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Sorry, can I go? You said so many interesting things. I want to go back and pick up a couple of them because they're so good. There's so many gems in here. One thing I hear a lot in here too is like command and control is okay in this situation in survival mode, and also you should get out of survival mode fast. Like you can't be in survival mode, because when I hear you say you can't do command and control for very long, what I also hear is if that's the right method in survival, you can't do survival very long.
That's right.
Either.
Survival mode is the worst place to be in. And here's the sad thing. Most of the teams that I see today are in survival mode. And the sad fact is that survival mode is actually very comfortable for a lot of teams. A lot of people, they are used to being in survival mode. They're used to fixing fires, and that's what they do best. They actually feel comfortable. If you've ever had people on your team that are the people that will get up at 2 a.m. to fix the problem there, or they'll go and fix, and that's what they do. They fix fires really, really well. What do those people do when there are no fires? What do they do when those skills are not needed anymore? So the sad truth is that also as managers, if I'm really good at handling really urgent situations, you do that, you do this, and I'm just really good at doing something when everyone is running crazy, I'm the one who stays calm, and then I manage a very urgent situation until it is solved. If that is my skill, and that is and I'm doing my job really, really well, you might even say that I'm the reason the organization took me is because this is how I do my job really well. Then what do I do if that situation is solved? If everything is planned and the reaction is not needed anymore? So getting out of survival mode is not, sometimes people might actually resist it, even though it hurts the organization and it hurts to be in survival mode, because some people are actually enjoying it. Some people are actually, that's their bread and butter. And being in an organization where, and again, I coming from software, an organization where every release is a stressful situation, where every build is like, it's a go, no go. What do? We get these people, you do the situation room every couple of weeks. We're going to do this. When that becomes a non-issue, when a release already happened and there is no big issue about that, what do all those people that manage all those situations do? And I think that's where turning the ship around in that regard. It's like a lot of organizations, the bigger they are, the processes are all designed for fire fixing, and they're designed, and the roles are designed for a lot of these things. And so even changing the processes to prevent those things might actually be problematic from politics standpoint.
Well, yeah, and when you talk about that, it makes me think too, there could be an assumption that startups, because they're running and gunning and trying to get to product market fit, might always be in survival mode, and that they maybe, there might be an assumption, I want to check it out with you, maybe like are they can startups get out of survival mode and also be in the other modes? Can they be in the two other phases, the self-organizing and the learning phase?
Um, that's an interesting question. I haven't thought about whether a startup is by definition a survival mode organization. I will say that I see a lot of startups that have grown up and now they have to take care of all their technical debt, and they are in that survival mode because that's actually how they made their money. So it
Right.
was very successful for them, not thinking about all these things, and basically, we'll pay the checks later for all the technical debt that we're
Mm-hmm.
doing, and they were really good at that survival mode. So maybe that's not maybe for a startup, survival mode is kind of the mode, but I think that once you get through the initial um, models, investments, and getting the initial comfort zone, then I think you should get out of there as soon as possible. Although I will tell you that I've seen some startups that don't have that issue, that they're not in
Right.
survival mode. They're doing really, really well. And the reason is that a lot of times they took care of a lot of these processes um, from the get-go, in that they already relinquish a lot of the control that they have on the process. That's where I'm doing my work these days about the pipeline-driven organizations. But if I'm looking at organizations like Netflix's and uh, they're big today, right? But Amazon, Facebook, Netflix, stuff like that. The reason those organizations are so successful in terms of delivering is because they actually removed people from their processes. So startups that today it's much easier to have fully automated processes, including quality, etc., where you don't need people to approve things every step of the way. The problem is whether you decide to invest time in preventing the fires, uh, or you don't have time to prevent it. You only have time to convince an investor. In that case, I think the pragmatic things to do is, well, if I don't have a company, if I don't do survival mode in this case, then fine. I've chosen this and I'm okay. We just have to be aware that we've chosen this. We have to be
Mhm.
aware we're in survival mode. And I think we have to have a plan. What do we do on the day where we decide that we want to start paying our technical debt? Where we let people, okay, up until now, it was a free for all. Now we're growing up, we're getting more and more people, we have established customer base. We cannot continue the way it is because it's not scalable. And it
Yep.
absolutely is not scalable in these cases.
Yep.
You have to keep throwing more and more people at it. And at some point, as you know, adding more people to a project does not actually make it faster, right? It's like having nine women be pregnant does not mean pregnancy will take 1 month.
Right.
You cannot be right half pregnant. You either do it or you don't. And when you in an organization where you have a lot of communication channels, actually everything slows down the more people have to work with each other. Startups have this kind of a weird, not weird, but a very unique thing that happens at the
Yeah.
beginning. Very small amount of people, which means very little communication, and a very fast workflow because everyone has full control of everything. So you don't need a lot of processes. And a lot of times the team at the beginning is very dedicated and everyone knows the vision. So you don't need a lot of communication to get things done. You just have to communicate to the outside world. And that's very, very fast. If I'm starting a startup today, I can work on it on my own and deploy it to the cloud and show a demo. And I don't need to communicate with anybody.
Well, and Roy, as you talk, I'm sorry to interrupt. It makes me think that, like, maybe, and I'm like thinking about stereotypes, really what I'm poking at here. And maybe in some ways, they're really more self organizing at that, instead of in survival mode, maybe they're self organizing. So I know we have other topics to talk about, but it's really interesting to sort of think about our perceptions and stereotypes about what we think it means to be a leader and how we map these modes to different phases of the organization.
Would you say, well, I would agree that I've seen startups where people are experts in what they do and they basically have to wear many hats. And so because they're such a small team and they're able to make decisions, you could say that they're in self-organizing mode because they know how to get out of any situation. But I'm specifically talking about the fact that in a startup, you have a lot of fires that are not expected, and we are knowingly letting go of not preventing them. We're letting go of preventing those fires because so for example, people will write code that they know is not high quality code. because they know they might need to throw it away tomorrow because it's just demo code. Now, what happens is that a lot of times the demo code actually ends up in the real product because people like it, but it was written really crappily. So now you have to fix fires to do it, but you made that decision. So yes, you can fix the fires and it might be easy for you. But I would say it's a conscious decision to be more in survival mode, where at some point you will end up with just continuously fixing those fires that you didn't prevent in the first place. And then you have to stop and say, okay, we have to stop this. We have to prevent those fires. And then you have to go back and kind of add those things. I see a question from Kyle.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, does this model extend to individual team members, e.g. new or junior employees in the learning phase, but more senior members can operate in the self-organizing mode? Does this affect how you manage the team overall?
Actually, that's a very common question, is that if I have one person on my team which is in survival mode, can you have that? Does that mean the whole team is in survival mode? Or and the way I think about it, well, it's really hard to think about that stuff. So I have a very simple rule. If one person on the team is in survival mode, the whole team is in survival mode, because a team is as slow as its weakest link if we're trying to get the team into a learning situation. What do I mean? In survival mode, fine. Some people are good at X, some people are good at Y, and they're just going to have these parallel paths. They're gonna work on that. You're going to work on this. In a learning organization, you want people to be able to not be the single source of failure. You want, if one person is not able to do their job, you want other people to be able to help them. You want people to be not experts, but shallow experts in a lot of different things. And if you let the people always do the same thing that they're good at and not things that they're not good at, they're never going to learn. So in that learning mode, then we will go by usually the rates of the people that know the least, which means if I have two people and I'm asking them to do pair programming in a learning team, I would ask them to let the person with the less experience write the code. And the other person will pair and mostly do the coaching 80% of the time, which means that the team speed is dictated by the people that know the least in the team. And that allows you to also allow other people in the team to learn how to coach other people and become better leaders. And that can be very, very difficult for a lot of people, where they don't want to coach other people. It's not in their job description, etc. But that's how I would measure it. So if someone on the team is in learning mode and the rest of the team is in self-organizing, then the team is in learning mode, because I would expect people to teach that person. And so that's how I would think about it. And specifically with individual team members, the real interesting stuff happens when we get to talking about coaching people and growing people, because then we actually work at the individual level and we challenge people on the skills that they were missing. But at the team level, I will choose one, and then I'll coach the entire team based on that specific decision. And it could change from this week to the next week, because the team situation will change. Today, the team is working on a website, and they're fully self-organizing. They know how to do this with their hands behind their back. But tomorrow, someone might ask the team to work on, getting this coffee cup to talk to my mouse. And they've never done this before, and they have no idea how to do it, and they can't even estimate it correctly. So they immediately either go into survival or learning mode, depending on how much time we have. And that's where the situation and the leadership has to change as well, based on that situation. Anyway.
Well, no, it's great. It's great. We're gonna, if you have anyone has last couple questions, pop them in. We're gonna be wrapping up pretty shortly here. So, speaking of coaching, I suspect some folks might be considering moving from an individual contributor role to management. And I'm curious, what are the pros and cons they should be thinking about?
So the pros and cons when you're leading people, I would say that.
Or moving from IC into management, right? Should I go into management? Should I do this? I have to coach people. I have to shift my leadership style in different phases. They might be wondering, what should they think about?
First of all, I got to tell you an interesting tidbit. Coming from a non-US country, it's always it's kind of interesting to me to to see that in the US, it's very common to refer to people who are not managers or leaders as individual contributors. And I find it a very kind of a weird thing because people will just say, oh, that's a team member and that's a team leader. And somehow in the US, it's called individual contributor. And I don't know why. It feels like it's like, oh, I'm sugarcoating the fact, or is it such a bad thing to be a team member? We'll call it an individual contributor. It feels like such a US thing.
Yeah, just
right?
so you know, it's not a word I tend to use a lot, but I use here for like common language because I use like team member too, but I use that word in order to use the language of folks, right?
It's such an
totally
enterprisey word. It's such an enterprise.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm an individual contributor. What does that mean? Oh, well, I'm working a team.
Yeah.
So you're a team member. That's nice. That's good to hear. A team member to me actually much more implies what I would expect you to do than to be an individual contributor. Because an individual contributor is someone, okay, you go sit in that corner and individually contribute. But a team member is someone who works in my team, who works as part of that team. And I think that actually highlights much better what I would expect. So speaking,
I love it. I have the same. I have the same problems with the terms too. Just so you know.
Okay.
I totally agree with you. You know, I think about it the same way, and I think language does matter. So we can go back to maybe taking on more management role or more leadership role or.
So there's a big difference between whether you chose to become a leader or a manager, or whether someone has chosen it for you. I've seen both. And I've seen people that had the option and chose not to do it. And the biggest thing that I see that people choose not to do it is because they feel that they're going to be disconnected from what they do in real life. And I think that is a true possibility I think there is a trap in management that if we don't take care of it, it becomes a reality. The trap is that when you become a leader or a manager, it is very easy to drown in a world of logistics and sometimes paper pushing, where you feel that the expected thing from you is now to handle something at the meta level and not at a lower level. So that's one. And the other big challenge for people that I see, including myself, is that when you're moving from the world as a team member to a leader / manager, you have to deal even more with people and their feelings and their thoughts and politics than you've ever felt that you needed to, even though, and that's just between you and me, Suzan, you need to learn how to work with people, even at the team member level, individual contributor. It will make you a much better contributor and a team member. So I'll tackle this separately. So the first thing is that it's not true that if you become a leader, you always end up disconnected from the thing that you used to do. Because if you learn about delegation, self-organizing teams, you're able to manage your time and ask people to delegate and give some responsibility to people, you're able to minimize the amount of time that you're expected to do things that you hate doing, which might be paper pushing and filling up Excel charts and all that stuff. And give yourself more time to do the things that you really want to do, maybe talking more with people, or even coding or working with architecture. You can free up your time, but people don't realize that they can free up their time as leaders. And the second thing is that people are afraid of the human effort that's required of understanding other humans. And they're like, well, I'm much more comfortable with my own computer, and that's what I want to do. And I think you have to make a choice. I think that becoming a leader forces you, if you choose to, right? It forces you, but some managers don't do it. But to become a good one, I think that you are forced to deal with how people work. What do they do? What they do? How do you convince people? How do you work with influence? And that makes you better developer, a better manager, and a better person, I think, in terms of the techniques that you have for dealing with things, and less frustrated when things are not going your way. Any one of us is usually, it's a really good way to not give yourself the excuse that says, well, it's not my problem, it's my manager's problem, I'm not allowed to do it. When you're a manager, you don't get to have those excuses anymore. And you're actually much more vulnerable because it is up to you to change your current situation so you're able to do something. You can't say to people, well, my manager says I can't, because now you can. You can choose to do something, but what is the right thing? it's actually pretty scary. And I think challenging ourselves to do this scary thing, I think it's a very healthy thing. I think if we don't do it, if we don't challenge ourselves to do something that scares us, I think we're gonna find a place that does challenge us in one way or another. So if your only fear is that you're going to be paper pushing for the rest of your career, that fear is unfounded. I've seen managers and myself as well in my different management roles. If you're able to manage your time and learn delegation, you're perfectly okay with spending sometimes even half of your time doing, being close to the things that you used to do, and pairing with people if you really wanted to. But if you are afraid of dealing with people, that is something you have to make a choice on. And I think if that is your fear, even if you become a manager, you learn about that stuff, and then you go back to being a team member, you will still be a better team member because you learned what it's like to be at that position. And I think it's very useful to be in that position at least once in your life, and feel what it's like to be in that type of pressure.
That's so great. We have one more question, but our time is up. So I see your question there. We'll pop that into Slack. Roy, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us during this session. Roy will be joining us over on the Lead Dev Slack, where he will be taking some questions. That last question will be put in there. So head over to the Bookmarked channel, where that will be taking place. And our next session will be on March 1st, where we'll be speaking with Amarachi Amici on her book, Getting Started in Tech, A Guide to Building a Tech Career. And on May 5th, we'll be talking to James Sanier on his book, Effective Remote Work. Thanks again for joining us.